Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Level Up podcast. I'm your host, Ken Rose, co-founder and CTO at OpsLevel. OpsLevel is an internal developer portal that helps engineering teams quickly ship quality software. Our Level Up podcast explores challenges, best practices, and stories from some of the brightest engineering and DevOps leaders about what it takes to build great products, teams, and companies. And today, we are having a discussion with Fernando Villalba, OpsLevel's own developer relations person. Fernando has a huge focus on all things related to teams executing and how internal developer portals can help with increasing productivity. So Fernando, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Definitely. I wanted to ask, right? One of the reasons we decided this podcast was there was a controversy a few weeks back around a McKinsey article titled, "Yes, you can measure software developer productivity." And that made it sound a whole lot like you can't normally, but they're saying, no, yes, you can. They then got dunked on a whole lot by a lot of just revered leaders in our industry on Twitter, on YouTube, X, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. Can you talk a little bit about just how did that whole thing start?
So it started with Kent Beck, which for those of you who don't know him, he's a bit of a legend in programming because he is one of the guys that signed the Agile Manifesto. And he has the XP stream programming implementation of it. So he knows his stuff when it comes about programming and probably productivity as well. And he posted a link to the McKinsey article saying that, yeah, this is not right. I mean, you can't measure developer productivity just like you're stating it here. You're oversimplifying it. And his fear is mainly that people are going to use this to create the wrong incentive for developers and firing the wrong people, right? And a lot of people responded to that. There was a lot of other DevOps thought leaders that responded to it. There was many spin-off articles and stuff. The irony of all of this, I think, is that now when you search for developer productivity, the McKinsey article is the #1 post. So I think there was a lot of negative reception of it, but on the other hand, it also made it a popular article. But I think McKinsey is getting a lot of fire these days. I mean, I don't know if you saw McKinsey was also criticized in the John Oliver show recently for a variety of other things, not because of developer productivity, but yeah, I think a lot of people don't trust McKinsey. So
it's interesting. There's almost like the Streisand effect I guess that's different from the Streisand effect, right? That's when somebody is trying to intentionally not bring attention to something. This is just more a bunch of negative attention, kind of surface it to the top. I was wondering, maybe for our listeners, we could summarize what is the thesis of the McKinsey article? Like, what was this main point that so many people seem to be against?
So essentially, they claim to be able to measure developer productivity with existing data and surveys by using metrics. And the metrics that they're using are a combination of DORA, space metrics, and also some opportunity-based metrics that they created and that they claim that have a proven track record of measuring productivity well. I mean, you have to take that at face value. You don't really know much about it. And they kind of explain those metrics a little bit, but not so much in detail. So it sounds a little disingenuous because it makes a very bold statement that you can actually do this. Whereas, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So so the title is yes, you can measure developer productivity. And what you're saying is then, and the layout of the article is, and here's some metrics to do it. So that doesn't sound so contentious so far. So where did it kind of go wrong? What are the main issues with the metrics that they're proposing?
So for me, the article has 4 main issues. I think the first one is that it makes a really boastful statement about it. It makes a very boastful statement saying, yes, you can definitely measure productivity and this is exactly how you do it. And this can be really harmful because you cannot have a set of productivity metrics that apply to all teams, all organizations, all companies. It just doesn't work. The second problem that the article has is that it does make some compelling points, but it does it a little clumsily. So for example, there is one point where they say that infrastructure tasks are low value for developers. And I think what they're trying to say they're trying to say that developers want to focus on coding. They don't want to have to be cognitively overloaded by doing infrastructure tasks, right? Especially when you consider that AWS is so difficult to use and, they don't have to learn how to use Terraform. I mean, they just want to focus on coding and deploying could be an abstraction there. But the way they call it low value, it kind of says, well, they are not low value, they are high value, but you need an abstraction to do it. And I think that's what they meant to say, but they got criticized because of it. And I noticed that some of the articles that criticized the McKinsey post, they took a jab at it, but I think it's because the way they wrote it. The third point for me that that people criticize it for is that some of the claims are just simply not true. So, for example, one that was heavily criticized is that they say, I'm gonna read you what this paragraph says. It says, one company found that its most talented developers were spending excessive time on non-coding activities such as design sessions or managing interdependencies across teams. In response, the company changed its operating model and clarified roles and responsibilities to enable those highest value developers to do what they do best, code. The reason why that is kind of wrong is because when you have like senior developers in a team, sometimes those developers are not going to be coding all the time. They're going to have planning sessions. They're going to be talking to less senior developers. They're kind of going to be organizing and mentoring people around them, right? It's not all about coding. You have to do this plan, so when you actually do the coding, it's easier. But all of those tasks have a lot of value in themselves, right? It's not like it's not like what they were doing doesn't matter. So what they were saying there is not it's just not right. And then for me, the fourth part where for the fourth thing that got criticized the most about the article, and that for me is bad, is that many of the metrics that they provided are either not useful or too vague or to be understood, or they can be potentially harmful if you implement them outright without thinking. So for me, those are the four main problems with it. There are other problems, but...
Yeah, when I read the article also, especially that third problem you picked on, where the focus of the article is how do you optimize for the amount of time spent coding at the expense of all these other important tasks that developers do, it felt very much like this model of like, okay, so if I have an organization, humans that work there are just these automaton, and how do I horizontally scale that in some perfect fashion to maximize the per unit output of each of those humans just writing code? And how do I get my more senior people only writing code? Whereas all those other tasks around mentorship, around kind of glue, the work that happens between, around alignment, is helping figure out like, are we even coding the right thing here? Like, are we building the right thing? Do we have the right set of skills on that team? So absolutely, right? The kind of hyper focus on just individual productivity and how to scale that is just wrong. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned like, hey, and some of the metrics aren't really useful. Like, can we talk about like, what were those metrics used? Like, where do they actually come from?
Yeah, so the post uses, I mean, the table that they show to show the metrics, they use mostly space metrics, and they separate the metrics exactly as the space paper is doing it. So they separate it into system, team, and user, individual developers. And but then on top of that, they also added the DORA metrics, which are very popular, and we all know they work. And then they added their own opportunity-based metrics on top. So, and most of the criticism I've seen of these metrics were targeted at the space metrics and the opportunity-based metrics.
Yeah, I agree. Everyone loves DORA because, I mean, it's rooted in science, right? Like there's rigor, there's analysis, there's hypotheses, there's testing, there's collection of empirical data. The Accelerate book, right, kind of demonstrates that entire, like, really adherence to the scientific method to, determine what are the DORA metrics are good metrics. You mentioned space, though, and opportunity-based metrics. Maybe we can pull the thread a little bit. Like, can you talk a little bit about what those opportunity-based metrics were? Like, what are they?
So they divide the opportunity-based metrics in 4 different lenses, or whatever it is that they call it. The first one is inner and outer loop time spent. And they talk about the inner loop means the time spent coding, building, and unit testing. And an outer loop, that's about deploying and releasing software. And they claim that outer loop activities are unsatisfactory for developers, and that developers should spend most of their time in the inner loop. I can kind of see what they were trying to get to here. I mean, I can see how there would be like an inner loop of activities that developers enjoy doing the most, but I wouldn't say that releasing software is unsatisfactory for developers. It's only unsatisfactory if your CI pipelines are not good and your releasing process is not good, right? If it's if it is good, then it is very satisfactory because you create something, you push it to production. It's like, yeah, it's working. The users are using it, so it's very satisfactory in a sense. It gives you like a sense of accomplishment. So I think the way they wrote it here is a bit wonky. I think they could have made a point here, but it doesn't quite work so well. So I don't know how you would use these in terms of like metrics. The other one that they're using is developer velocity index benchmark, which is a vague benchmark. They claim to measure developer velocity against industry benchmarks. I think the post doesn't really elaborate on this, so I can't tell you much more what that means. And then they have a contribution analysis, which is about assessing contributions from individuals to the team's backlog, which is a bit like, I don't know, it feels like a bit like you're looking at individuals and trying to measure the productivity. And this can get a little, this can cause a lot of scapegoating. I mean, if you have like a developer who is mentoring, but is not doing other metrics that you consider valuable, but they are still valuable, I mean, I don't buy this. I don't think this contribution analysis is, it works so well, at least the way they described it. And then finally, they have a talent capability score. And they talk about that you need to have a diamond-shaped distribution of developers in your teams. That they should be mostly intermediate developers with some senior developers and some junior. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what value does that bring to measuring productivity really, because like I said, like the most senior developers probably are not going to be doing most of the coding. They're going to be doing the mentoring and the planning. So there you have it.
We talked about like the three classes of metrics that the paper talked about, right? So it was DORA, space, and these opportunity-based ones. And the opportunity-based one sounds like there's maybe something there. Like I don't disagree. Like the if you have to wait for a long CI/CD pipeline, that sucks. That's low value. But like that's a bit clumsy in terms of the presentation. The other was maybe we can talk about space metrics a little bit. Like that was the other kind of main theme of metrics that they were using. And you said that the space metrics also kind of had some criticism. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think it's quite funny. It's a bit of an elephant in the room kind of thing. Because when you read the space paper, it says a lot of things that are true. It's also good, but it also makes some of the same claims. And I read the paper a couple of times. I highlighted it. And I do personally feel that it's missing a bit of substance. And the funny thing about watching all these criticisms of the McKinsey paper is that you had some people criticizing these metrics by proxy. So they would be criticizing the metrics of the McKinsey paper, but indirectly they were kind of criticizing the space paper as well. I think one notable case here is like if you watch the video that Dave Farley did criticizing the McKinsey paper, he really was bashing some of these metrics. And when he was doing that, there were the space metrics. Like for example, he was saying that developer satisfaction has nothing to do with it, and blah blah blah. And he was talking about he was criticizing like code review velocity and other things as well. I don't remember exactly all the things that he criticized, but yeah, I think there's some fair points there, that some fair jabs that were thrown at the space paper and that were done by proxy. I mean, like I said, I have tremendous respect for Nicole Forsgren and I love the DORA research and all of that. I'm just saying that perhaps there's a bit there, like in terms of improvement for the space paper as well. So, and that's the feeling I got when reading all this criticism and also reading both papers myself.
Right. The attacks against the McKinsey paper are actually like more criticisms of the underlying space metrics. Got it. Let me bubble a step up here. Like the whole part of the contention here was that like, well, yes, you can measure productivity. Why is it like, are software leaders focused on productivity? Like, and if so, like, why do you think leaders care so much about productivity as the needle to move?
Well, I mean, if you're spending a lot of money hiring someone, you want to know that you're getting you're getting value out of it. So it is very seductive. The idea of being able to measure productivity, it is very seductive, but you need to take a step back and understand what that means and how harmful that can be. Yeah, because it can produce the wrong outcomes.
Yeah, like when I think about if I had a factory that was producing widgets, then productivity kind of makes sense because there's a lot of repetition, And so it's just how can I tune each individual subsystem to maximize some output. But software is a much more, I mean, there's a scientific part to it, but there's also kind of an artistic part to it. There's a craftsmanship that comes to it. It's bespoke. Like the way, you know, there's large patterns that can be used for how software is defined, but each company has their own culture and their own nuance, and their own things that they're optimizing for. So I agree with you that there's a seduction in thinking like, well, hey, like car manufacturers can focus on per unit output. Can we do the same with software, right? I guess what are they really like trying to measure? If productivity is not it, like what are they trying to get to?
Well, to me, that's where the danger lies. I think that, yeah, they're trying to measure many things, but the problem is that when you're trying to measure productivity, what you think that is productive for the organization, it may be different for a team, and it may be different for the team between quarter and quarter, right? Like from quarter to quarter, like the OKRs, the productivity may change. So if you get like top-down productivity metrics pushed down onto teams and you say, yes, this is what you have to aim for, eventually developers, what they're going to do, they're going to game that system. I think even with amazing metrics like DORA metrics, which are really good, if you started incentivizing your developers by DORA metrics, I think it would get to a point where people would just do like 100 deployments a day. You know, if you gave them cash for every deployment, like you would start like breaking down everything like as many deployments as possible. So I'm not saying that teams and companies shouldn't aim to be more productive, to have like a goal, a mission, what you're trying to achieve. But perhaps don't do it in a way where you're trying to force people to follow that, to end at that goal, right? So I think that's down to teams, how the teams organize themselves.
Yeah, this really gets into like quantitative versus qualitative metrics. Like if you have purely quantitative metrics and you don't have any of the nuance for like, okay, but what's the goal that this metric is actually trying to accomplish? Then you're right. Like you can get pathological cases where like, hey, what if every line of code I wrote, I just made as a separate deploy, right? And kind of like really, it's a degenerate case to try to incentivize that metric, but not understand the nuances. Like, hey, overarchingly, we want to have more deploys so that way we can sort of move faster and have a higher volume of throughput, you know, in our system. So again, if productivity kind of like, so productivity probably isn't the right thing to measure, right? For software leaders, because it's not analogous to a widget factory that's producing things. Like, what should software leaders be thinking about then in terms of what to measure if productivity is not it?
So I had a chat with someone who worked in Google doing developer productivity for a number of years. And he told me something that was very interesting. He said to me that the easiest thing to measure when it comes to productivity is to measure what doesn't make you productive, not what makes you productive. I think there's certain patterns that repeat themselves over and over and over again across organizations. And I think the best thing that a company can do is measure all of the things that create friction, all of the things that do not make you productive, all of the things that are stopping developers from working at the most speed. Basically, all the things that stop developers from getting into the flow whenever they're working. And I think flow state also brings happiness and brings other sort of advantages. But for me, if you can turn the idea around and instead of saying, oh, we're going to measure, you know, productivity, we're going to have these metrics that measure productivity. If you actually aim to measure things that hinder flow state for developers, it will be a lot more productive and you will actually see productivity as a byproduct of that.
Got it. So instead of focusing on maximizing productivity, you're focusing instead on kind of minimizing toil.
Yeah.
Minimizing the things that hinder developers from, you know, if you have an absence of all the things that could hinder, then the only thing left to do is get into that flow state and be productive as an implementation.
Yes. And there's so much that goes into that, right?
So I can definitely speculate on some, but can you give us some examples, Fernando, of like things that would typically hinder flow state?
Yes. So for example, I think for me, one of the things that can hinder flow state is if you have bad communication channels, or if the communication in your company is very heavily reliant on synchronous communication. If you have multiple teams that in order to get productive, they need to talk to each other constantly because they don't have meaningful abstractions between each team that they can use, like team team B, may be able to talk to each other with an API. They don't have to like be talking, constantly setting up meetings. And then if management just keeps peppering your schedule with meetings constantly, and your job is to concentrate in doing the work, it's going to be very difficult for you to be productive. So you have to structure communication in a way that communication enhances your flow state. Communication, spoken communication, synchronous communication done in a way that your planning makes that more efficient. It gets you pumped for work because everything is planned. And then other things affect that as well. I think tooling is another thing. I feel like sometimes companies choose tools that are extremely overcomplicated to use, and they don't notice this. They don't notice how much friction this creates, because if you choose the wrong tool, sometimes you may choose a tool that has all the features in the world, but it's so incredibly painful to use. And if you find yourself into that situation, then if you have to do like 30 steps in order to do something, whereas another tool that may be less feature rich allows you to do it in one, I'd say that the other tool is probably better for you. It's going to save you money, and it's going to save you a lot of engineering hours in the long run. So for me, those are two examples. There are other things as well. If you hire employees and you have bad culture, you treat them badly, if they have to be thinking constantly about how badly they're treated, they're not going to get into the flow either. So I think a lot of things can affect flow state. I think flow state is a nice goal to have, but then you have to look at the whole picture. And I think everyone can contribute. Everyone should contribute in terms of like engineering teams and management as well to make this happen, because it's not just management making this happening. I think every single employee, every team needs to start thinking in this way. How can I do things in a way that other people can find their flow easily?
Yeah, when I think about flow state for either an individual or a team, it's like I have an idea of what the destination I'm trying to get to is in terms of what I'm trying to accomplish. And there's nothing between me and that destination except for how fast I can get the thoughts out into a keyboard, right? And then the things that hinder are the examples you gave. It's like I'm doing something. Oh yeah, I have to call this service. It's done by that team. How do we do that? What's the interop? What's the API flow? What's the data exchange? And all of a sudden I'm hindered. I loved your other example of like if you have crappy culture or toxic people, it's like I need to do this thing and I'm working with this other person on this part. But this person's really a pain to work with. Oh, their pull request is really bad. Oh, they're really antsy. And the other one also I think about is just, okay, I've got the first merge request done. Oh, there's no one around to review it. Oh, it takes like 6 hours to get this thing deployed to production, right? And that's hindering me from like going on to a part two. So it's anything that's getting in your way of like from the starting point to like what the destination is, and just knowing you have a clear path there.
There's a very funny video. There's a very funny video of Everybody Loves Malcolm. I think that's the name of the show. And he needs to fix a light bulb. And then he goes to fix the light bulb and he notices that the drawer is broken. So he goes to grab something else, to fix that drawer, and that thing is broken. And another thing is broken, another thing is broken. And then he has to go to the store, and then the car is broken as well. So he starts fixing the car, and his wife comes in. And he's like, well, didn't you fix the light bulb? And he's like, what does it look like I'm doing? So it's kind of like a similar thing. If everything is broken on the way for you to do something, you end up being frustrated and not into the flow, right? So
I think it was Malcolm in the Middle, right? There's another
Malcolm in the Middle, yes.
There was also Everybody Loves Chris, and so I think it was who's that? Bryan Cranston was the actor. He played
yes, that's right.
The Walt Whitman on Breaking Bad after. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's always I know exactly the clip you're talking about, and for me, I love that one because it's like it's yak shaving. It's like, okay, I gotta do this, and then I gotta do this, and I gotta do this, and soon you're covered in yak hair. So we kind of talked a little bit about flow state and like kind of what it is. I guess again, maybe can you just help me understand like why is that flow state then the important thing? Why is that a good thing to be trying to optimize for?
Yeah. So for me, when you talk to developers, for example, the other day I met this junior developer. He was straight out of the university, and he was working in this company. His eyes were lighting up when he was talking about what he was doing. He was saying, "Oh, I'm working on this. I'm setting up Vault HashiCorp for the company. I'm doing this and that." And he was really excited about it because I could tell that when he was working, he was like invested in it, and he found his flow, and he could work unimpeded. And it looks like that's the way his company was operating, right? And I feel like time and again, you will see that when developers get into the flow and they're working and they can get stuff done, they're generally much happier than when they don't. Like we keep talking about, oh, developer satisfaction, developer happiness, but that's like really vague, right? I mean, you could give everyone Ferraris at OpsLevel. I'm sure we would be happy for at least a couple of weeks, right? But that's not gonna really, it's not really gonna benefit the company either. And I don't think it's gonna benefit like the quality of the code that people are gonna be producing. But if people are able to consistently get into the flow, I think that brings happiness. And this is not just me saying it. I think when you look at studies that talk about the meaning of life, one of the pillars that they talk about is always like, well, they say family, community, blah, blah, blah. And one of the pillars they always talk about is like having a job where you can get into the flow. When you can get in, you can, get absorbed into it. And I think, I generally think that this is something that makes people happier. So it's a thing worth investing your time in to make better in your company.
100%. I think the word I think about there is purpose, right? That like, what is your purpose? And that expression, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And when you're in flow state, at least I can talk about myself as a developer, when you're in flow state, it's just karmic. I don't know how else. And then you come out of the other side and you finish something and it's pretty and it works. And it's just like, it's such a great feeling.
Yeah. And it's not like, this is not a new thing. I think maybe they didn't use exactly the same language to describe it or whatever. But when you look at what Google was doing right from the beginning, people looked at this and they're like, oh, they're spoiling developers. This is so frivolous. They're buying them, they're making dinner for them, washing their clothes, they have like, they care for the children, this is so frivolous, like paying all this stuff for developers. They're so entitled, blah, blah, blah. But I think they were really clever about it because they were giving all of these things. So you don't have to worry about so much stuff. You can just get to work. You sit there and you get to work. You don't have to worry about 100 different things. So it wasn't exactly altruistic. And I mean, there's a dark side of that people keep saying that then people would spend too many hours at the company. But I would argue that many of those people that were spending many hours there, they were enjoying it because all of those things were taken care of for them, right? So I think, yeah. I think all unicorns at one point or another actually operated on these principles.
I want to ask, we talked about like the seduction that productivity can bring, right? So I guess like, why is productivity just talked so much more about than developer flow? Like, why is flow state sort of not the center of, a developer experience strategy?
Yeah, well, if you get to a room full of executives and you start talking flow state, they may not get what you're talking about, right? Because if the executives were developers before or have a technical background, they may get it. But I think productivity just sounds better for them. It's something that they can understand, right? They are like, yes, okay, so productivity is what's gonna get me money. Whereas indirectly, I think flow state is what gets you the money, what gets you the quality, what gets you the good software. So I think for anyone talking about developer productivity, it is our responsibility to bring this to the fore, right? And to talk more about the importance of developers being able to get into this flow state and being able to work unimpeded. So we will see like how the industry moves to talk more about this, because right now, even the people who criticize and say that productivity, you can't measure productivity, this and that, they keep talking about productivity all the time. And I know they do it because this is what people like to listen, like to read, and this is what gets clicks on LinkedIn and engagement. But I think it's important that people start to consider flow state a little more. At least that's my opinion, anyway. And by the way, there's one article called Maker's Schedule and Manager's Schedule that I recommend to everyone. Yeah, I don't know if everyone has read it, but I think it's especially good for managers to read it, because sometimes managers don't get that, you shouldn't just like pepper, the day with meetings for developer, because a developer needs hours to be able to work on stuff. So
again, going back to that mental model of flow state is I'm here and I have this pathway of what I'm thinking about to get to where I need to go. And the other interrupted part can be time, where it's like, okay, I'm working it's 11 o'clock and we have a meeting now. And I've got the XKCD, or I don't remember if it's XKCD, there's a comic, it's like the guy has a thought and another thought bubble and another thought bubble, and somebody asks him a question and this collapse of like all these like layered and chained thoughts of how some system is going to work. Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly how it is. That's why I always say that think about the meetings that you set up. If the meeting can be communicated synchronously, maybe don't set up that meeting, because there's no point.
Yep. Well, Fernando, listen, today we talked about, all things developer productivity, right? We talked about the McKinsey article and a lot of the pushback that it got. We talked about why productivity isn't the thing to measure and developer flow state is. Before we wrap up, a question I ask all of our guests is, Fernando, what is your favorite music to listen to while you're working?
It changes from time to time. I listen to lo-fi a lot recently. just this week, I've been working from time to time in my living room, and I have a 5.1 surround system. So I looked for like this 8D lo-fi, and it kind of like envelops you around. So it's quite cool to listen to. Sometimes I like to listen to chilled Lord of the Rings and fantasy music as well while I work. It's very relaxing. It kind of gets me into the mood. I think a lot of people seem to listen to the chill music from Skyrim. I don't know if you've seen that game. Like the chill music from Skyrim is really good. Even my wife really likes it, and she doesn't like the video game, so she listens to it. But yeah, those are two examples. Then I like retrowave as well from time to time. But yeah, those are mostly what I listen to.
Awesome. The reason I always ask guests is that ends up being what my Friday afternoon playlist looks like when I am doing some work myself. So I'm going to definitely check out the Skyrim, the kind of chill Lord of the Rings, and some lo-fi beats as well. Well, listen, Fernando, it has been just great having you on the show. And, we work together, so we might have you again as a guest. To all of our listeners, again, thank you for making it to the end of another episode. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to see on the show, please send us an email at levelup@opslevel.com, and we'll see everybody next time. Happy building.